Hi guys, today I'm going to be doing a video on how I made my cow costume for this month's look. To start off, I actually just got a white bikini base from Shein and I used fabric paint. I ended up mixing two colors because both of them, one of them is too dark, one of them is too light, so I just mixed the two of them in a little paint pot. And then I actually painted on all the cow print. This is because I couldn't find any cow print, pink cow print specifically, bikinis anywhere. So I just kind of did that. Took forever. You just really want to take your time with it if you want and make sure everything is just really saturated and coated so it doesn't end up cracking later. Fabric paint is also a good thing to use just because it's a little bit more stretchy than like acrylic paint. And then I did give it a second coating, just where I felt like I maybe missed a few spots and everything. Next up, we're gonna make the skirt. So to start off, I got a roll of faux leather in white from Amazon. You can also, just any faux leather works. And I cut, I think it was 3.5 inches for the top layer of the skirt. And I didn't exactly measure, I just cut as long as I could and then kind of like pleated it from there to figure out like length. I don't know, I'm really bad at doing that whole math thing where you measure it and then measure the size of the pleats and then you can figure it out that way. That makes no sense to me. I just pretty much cut as long pieces possible as I can and then I pleat it until it's the correct length. I know it sounds stupid, but it works for me. I like using clips when I work with faux leather or real leather, any thicker fabrics. I prefer fabric clips for those instead of using pins, just because pins do end up putting holes in the fabric, and it's really hard to get those out of faux leather. It's also nice because then you don't have to try and stab a needle through 3 layers of faux leather, which is not an easy task. So once I pinned all of them to the correct length and everything, I got on the sewing machine and started sewing it down. One trick to sewing faux leather is I recommend getting a face powder, or you can use baby powder, anything that's gonna basically make the machine glide over that like sticky faux leather feeling. It really helps. You'll see me kind of powdering in between each stitch. This took forever. You just gotta have a lot of patience. Then I went ahead and I repeated that with 2 other fabrics, one kind of lace and one a pink fabric. I just pleated them all and then I ended up sewing them all together. Yeah, I tried to do kind of a layering effect and match the pink to the pink on the bikini top. I recommend being very patient at this part just because it's a lot of fabric to be sewing over and you want to make sure you go slow so you don't break any needles. This is what the finished product looked like. I was really happy with it. It like was super bouncy and had just the right amount of volume, especially when you made it like when it was actually on the body, which I'll show you at the end of the video. Next up, I was going to make a collar and 2 cuffs for this look. I went ahead and cut, I believe it was 2.5 inches. And then that was for the collar, which, because I'm going to fold it in half and sew that. Here I'm kind of just clipping it in place. I always cut out more more than I need. So I didn't exactly measure my neck, but I knew that it was enough to like go around my neck at least once. I ended up having a lot of extra. Then I went ahead and I cut an additional 2.5 inches the rest of the roll, just for the actual cuffs themselves. Which also that part is also going to get folded in half. Then I went ahead and I cut, or I kind of had to straighten it up because I did mess up when I was cutting the previous one, so I have a fresh straight edge to kind of go off of. So you'll see me doing that here. So then next up, I kind of tried to figure out the actual width of the cuff that I'm going to do, because the other piece is going to go over the actual cuff. So I think it ended up being 2 inches. And I just cut enough for 2 cuffs of that. As you can see here, I'm going and clipping down all the edges of the part that is going to get folded over. Then I also use some of the excess 2-inch width fabric to actually make a pleated thing that is going to go on the bottom of the collar. So I basically pinned it on each side, so I had pleats going all the way down. And I'll show you how I sewed that in a second. But for this, I'm actually going to go ahead and sew the collar and the 2 cuffs that go over the actual cuffs, if that makes sense at all. I sewed down each side of those so that they're in half. As you can see, I switched it over and I'm doing the other side now. And then for the pleated thing, I'm actually going to sew 2 lines down the center, about 1/4 inch apart, so that basically I'm going to be able to cut down the center and have 2 sets of pleats. But this kind of took forever. You have to be very careful. So then I went ahead and did that second line, just a 1/4 inch to the side of the first line, as you can see here. So then I pretty much just cut down the center of it. I tried doing it with a roller, but it was a little too thick, so I ended up switching to scissors. You'll see in a second. I felt like this was a more effective way to make like a pleated thing than to sit there and make 10 million pleats and just sew along the top of it. And yeah. Then you have the collars and then the other pieces that I sewed, the collar and the 2 cuffs. And then I cut the main part, the 2-inch piece, in half and basically just measured to make sure it was at least enough to go around my wrist once. I always add a little extra. Then I ended up putting the pleated bits to the bottom of it because I'm wanting to go for like a very like frilly kind of whimsical look. This I had to actually use pins for because obviously it's not on the edge, so you can't really clip it. And I don't really measure anything, to be honest. I just kind of like hold it up to my wrist as I go to make sure and see if it's good length and everything, and kind of go based off of that. And then for that strip that I sewed in half, that is going to actually go on top of all of that. And I'm going to sew it part of the way on it. You're not going to sew it all the way the length because you're going to need it. You're going to need the main part of the cuff to overlap in the very end. So I actually only sewed, I want to say 4 inches and like, or maybe 3 inches in the center. I did more than that in this clip and I ended up having to seam rip it, so just don't do what I do what I say. And then you're going to go ahead and sew the other side. And then finally just sew down those pleats. So this is where I kind of made the mistake of sewing too close to the edge. I don't recommend doing that. I recommend only really at the very center of the cuff, sewing, I want to say a 3-inch span. And then I ended up using D-rings. You can use different like belt items and stuff. D-rings are what I had on hand. They're really nifty, so you basically just put them in the spot. I cut off the excess and then I wrapped it around both of them, and you're gonna sew across right there. And then they basically act as a way to, it's like almost like a belt without any holes or anything in the actual cuff. It's pretty cool actually. I really like D-rings. They're not used very often. Like that. And so it just goes through once, both of them, and then it goes back through just the top one. That's how you secure them. Next up, I wanted to just make a little loop for the excess to go through the excess of the cuff, kind of like a little belt loop. So I cut little strips of the excess fabric I had, and you can see here I just put them in place on where I was going to sew them. And I just sewed on either side to make a little loop. And then here I'm just cutting off the excess now that I'm finished the final product. As you can see, that's how they look when they're finished. They are a little harder to get on than normal. As you can see, one of them had a little bit longer than the other, so I went ahead and fixed that. Next I went up to the collar, and I actually had extra of that pleated stuff, so I ended up just sewing it onto the collar, as you can see here. Then I cut it down to the correct length, and measured it basically against my neck and made sure it's correct. Next, I used magnetic snaps. I love these things. They're super cheap. You can buy like 100 of them for like 10 bucks on Amazon. But all you do is I just put it on one side, and you don't have to sew or anything. You just push them through the fabric and then push down the little tabs on the back. The only downside is they do show on the other side. As you can see, it's not like a normal snap where it's just sewn onto one side and you don't have to see it when you're on the other side. But I don't mind it. It makes it a lot more convenient. So I don't mind the look, but if I were to sell the product or anything like that, I definitely wouldn't use these snaps. Or I'd be a little bit more strategic about the placement. But yep, so it just snaps just like that. I love magnetic snaps. Next up, I went ahead and covered the little spot there with some of the leather because I didn't like how it looked. Then I found these awesome, really cute heart bells at Daiso, which is like a Japanese Dollar Tree almost. And then I kind of figured out how to attach it, and I ended up using basically a little metal like loop, and I sewed that on, as you can see here. It's like the ones that you use for jewelry and everything. And I was gonna try and use a second one of those to attach the bell, but I really struggled with that for some reason. So I ended up using this costume ring I had, but you can just use a little bit of wire or whatever you have on hand to attach it. I'll show you in just a second. See, I used that little guy. It was just some sort of costume ring I had like laying around that I like cut and then made into that. So just something similar I recommend using, or you can sew the bell directly on. Whatever loop system I was trying was just not working. Next up, I attached the skirt to those bikini bottoms. I just tacked them on. I tried on the actual outfit and kind of like played around with the positioning and ultimately decided to attach them pretty close to the front of the dress, just like I want to say like half an inch off of the main part. You can also use snaps for this part if you want it detachable, but I didn't really see the need. This is the final look. I can't really show you too much. I made some cow ears using the same tutorial as before. So I